What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel and another weekly running and training vlog where the main purpose of this video is for you to tell me about your week of training. I want to know about your successes and I definitely want to hear about your setbacks. Now from looking at my Strava over this past weekend, I know that a ton of you have raced. So if you raced, I want to know about that race. I want to know how it went. I want to know if you set a goal, if you met that goal, if you missed that goal. And spoiler, guys, you will get nothing but positivity from me. I think that setting a goal is rather irrelevant, or what the goal is irrelevant, because if we set a goal, we are going to run to our best ability to reach that goal. So just because you didn't reach the goal that you set doesn't mean that that's a miss. That is an absolute win. So tell me all about it. And also for everyone else that didn't race, I didn't race last week, but I still had a pretty good week of running as I'm coming back from an ankle injury, which I'm going to tell you all about in just a minute. I also want to hear from you non-racers out there. And speaking of non-racers, turns out there's a difference between when you started running, either pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, and if you want to race. And guys, our running community is growing. It turns out that 28% of the whole community, that's over a quarter of the running community, has started since the pandemic started. So this study surveyed 4,000 runners, and that's a pretty substantial sample size. And it turns out that there is a big difference between if you started running during the pandemic or you were a runner before the pandemic started. In fact, most pre-pandemic runners enjoy racing. Whereas if you started during the pandemic, there's about half that aren't too keen on the idea of racing, which totally makes sense, right? If you started running at a time when there were no races, you might not be turned on by racing as much as we are that started before the pandemic. So to put this in perspective, 63% of pre-pandemic runners said they were going to do an in-person race in the next 12 months, whereas only 50% of post-pandemic runners said they were going to do a race in the next 12 months. So of those numbers of runners that said they want to race in the next 12 months, there is another breakdown. 85% of the pre-pandemic runners have said that the race they want to do in the next 12 months, they hope it's in person, whereas only 68% of the post-pandemic runners have said that they want to race in person. This is where the separation kind of shows itself to me, because as a pre-pandemic runner, I have to say, I am completely done with virtual racing. In fact, if I never did another virtual race again, it would probably be too soon. And here's why. And this is just my opinion, me as a runner. I grew as a runner going to races. That's where I go. That's where I test myself, go and test myself against the competition. And I have definitely found that I perform best at races. Now, this is going to be like a duh, man, of course, for other pre-pandemic runners, because we know that once we get on that start line on a race day, we are going to push so much harder than we ever could in training. But post-pandemic runners don't have that same vision of what races can do for them. Now, if you are a post-pandemic runner and I'm completely off base here, why don't you let me know in the comments? Also, if you're a pre-pandemic runner and I'm totally off base here, let me know in the comments. And I guess now would be a great time, if you're not subscribed, to invite you to subscribe to my channel. I post new running videos at least twice a week. And make sure you give this video a thumbs up, because it's always nice to give your fellow runner props. So it turns out that about 32% of post-pandemic runners want to run a virtual race. In fact, they would prefer it. And the study showed that post-pandemic runners are 115% more likely to participate in virtual races than pre-pandemic runners. There's a lot of pre-post-pandemic going on in this video. I should probably get a pop filter for my mic. Now, I became aware of this study through Canadian Running Magazine, and I'm going to link to the article in the show notes below. So if you're interested in reading a little more, go ahead and check out that link. So post-pandemic runners are 115% more likely to participate in a virtual race than pre-pandemic runners, which could sound a little dodgy to you pre-pandemic runners, and I am included in that group. Because as I previously mentioned, we just don't get the same push, the same motivation when we're running a virtual event as we do an in-person event. But it actually makes sense for these post-pandemic runners that started only doing virtual races. If you don't know any different and you've increased your potential, you've grown as a runner, you've grown as a person through only doing virtual races, why would you want to change that? So let's briefly touch on running motivations. And I know I touched on this last week when I talked about what type of runner you are. So if you saw that video last week, this is going to sound a little familiar. But 34% of pre-pandemic runners are motivated by competition, whereas only 22% of post-pandemic runners are motivated by competition. That's a pretty big gap. Some of you might like being social and going out for a run with your running people, but social interaction motivates only 11% of post-pandemic runners, whereas it motivates 16% of pre-pandemic runners. So for those of us that ran before the pandemic started, more of us like to run with our running friends, which also makes sense, because if you started during the pandemic, you weren't really allowed to run with people, had to social distance and all that. So they grew to love the sport without running with other running friends. I guess it's kind of obvious when you think about it, but it's still Still fun to hear about, right? Okay, so get this, because these are getting into some bigger numbers now. So physical health is also a big motivator to start running, especially for the post-pandemic runners. 72% of post-pandemic runners said that physical health was a reason that they started running and a reason that they run. Compare that with 61% of pre-pandemic runners. So a far smaller number of pre-pandemic runners run for the health, which absolutely makes sense because we know that a lot more pre-pandemic runners run for the sake of competition. Pretty fascinating running stuff, eh? So guys, let me know in the comment below if you are a pre-pandemic runner or a post-pandemic runner. If you want to add any more than that, I'd love to read it. I respond to every single comment. Now it's time to get into my training this week, and things were looking up. Things were looking up this week. I've actually had a pretty good week of running without going overboard with my training. And it's really funny because I noticed that after just taking 3 weeks off of running for my ankle, I've noticed things are quite a bit harder getting back into it. My easy runs are just not as easy. Not based on heart rate, my effort level appears to be the same, but my perceived effort just seems a lot higher than it did before I actually hurt myself. So I'm here to tell you, coming back is it's no joke. But I'm trying really hard not to overdo things and re-injure myself in some other way. But as long as I can keep my eyes open and not trip over things while I'm running, I'm ahead of the game. And guys, I guess I'm ahead of the game this week because I didn't trip once, which is always a good week, especially after a week where you trip and then you're out for 3 weeks. But I did start off my week on Monday with 10 miles. Now, before I go any further, I have to say that all my runs this week were at an easy pace, just going out and churning out the miles, which I do enjoy, but I also enjoy picking up the pace a couple days a week. But I have to take things nice and slow. So this week was all easy miles. 10 miles on Monday. Now, a couple of you called me on running 10 miles on kind of like my first real day back. But here's why I did it. I had to go out and I had to test the Adidas Boston 10. And I wanted to at least get a double-digit run in those shoes. Was I playing with fire? Maybe, but because nothing bad happened, it turned out it was the right decision. And I had a great run. Those 10 miles were fantastic in the Boston 10. If you haven't already checked out that video, I will link to it up here. Tuesday was 5.1 miles, again, just going out, turning over those legs. I did that after I rode the Peloton, so I was nice and warmed up. And I have to say that just running 5.1 miles was pretty fun. I enjoyed only going out for a short amount of time and then having so much more time after. I took Wednesday off, so no running on Wednesday, but then on Thursday I ran 6.3 miles. On Friday I ran 7.5 miles. Now this was a work day and that's about as long as I can squeeze in before going to work. Now Saturday I ran 11 miles and I did pick up the pace in 30-second blocks. I want to say that they were strides, but I really wasn't pushing it at a stride level. I was just kind of picking up my pace to see how everything felt. I'm still just a little wary of running on that ankle. Even though I'm not feeling anything when I'm running, I'm worried about it giving out when I'm running. It's probably crazy, but it is what it is. So I picked up the pace a little bit for 30-second increments and everything seemed to feel really good. I rounded out the week with a solid 5.1 miles. Now, if you saw my YouTube short yesterday, I spoke about how I went out a little later than I usually do and it was really hot. But Sunday is the day when I'm actually off work on Sunday. Sunday is the day I like to go for a little shorter run so I can spend a little more time with my wife. So everything worked out exactly as I wanted it to, exactly as planned. So that left me at the end of the week with 45.12 miles, which is about 72.6 kilometers. I also spent a little bit of time on the Peloton this week, although not as much as I have in the past 3 weeks. But I did manage to knock out a shade under 188 miles, which is about 302 kilometers. So all in all, a pretty good week. Next week, I have a very heavy work week, so I'm probably going to be running a little less, but that's good. Sometimes I need that work to kind of rein me in. Okay, my friends, if you've made it this far into my video, you are an absolute champion, a star of the channel. Thank you very much. My name's Matt, and I post new running videos at least twice a week. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.